Vintage stereo restorers and appreciators. So this is part 2 in the Kelly and Dawn citation receiver. And what I wanted to talk about today is a little bit about troubleshooting, a little bit of about what you should have if you want to work on these. And the neat thing is, this kind of stuff is so unlike the way products are made today because it has parts that you can take out and replace individually, either by unsoldering them, unbolting them, unscrewing them, whatever. Things can be cleaned. You can buy a lot of generic parts that will replace parts inside this. And I'll just give you an example here. The way I left off in the last video, this channel here was running very hot. There's a low frequency oscillation going on. And that usually means that DC's getting back in there. There's some kind of a feedback loop happening. And it's usually for very simple reasons, like a bad component. So I was getting ready to do a video where I was going to remove all the caps here, replace them. If that didn't work, take all the transistors out, replace them. And I used one of what I call the necessary tools to look at things, and that is a magnifying lamp. And this isn't even an expensive one. This is about 30 bucks. But it's enough to magnify it so that you can see things. And I'll give you an example. So I had it flipped over last night, and I'm looking underneath. Just see what the solder is like, because I know some rough soldering. And here's what I noticed. Right here, this capacitor right here that's in the bias circuit, it was actually bridged over with solder. So it could not filter the DC out from the driver stage through to the power stage. And that was causing these outputs to turn on full power, but it's not at a level you could hear it. And the output capacitor blocks it. But it was something that just visually, and this is the biggest thing. I want to tell you some secrets today about doing this. All right. I worked in electronics both in a stereo shop back in the 80s. I worked for the telephone company in the switching office during the modernization times, from basically mechanical to digital. I had to know both systems. I've soldered, I've replaced, I've tested, I've done end-to-end testing. You wouldn't believe how many times. And one thing I've learned is you got to trust your nose. You got to trust if something's running hot, if something doesn't sound right. I know that runs counter to the way that a lot of things are done today with test equipment and computer test routines. But you're working on something here from 1970, okay? And this is something anybody can do. So anyway, I fixed that solder joint. I turn it on, it's playing well, and I'm just going to flip it on now. I got some speakers on it. So tip number 1, a good magnifying lamp, or a good enough one. Tip number 2, a pair of Minimus 7 speakers from Realistic. It could be any of them. There's wood versions, there's metal versions, there's black versions, there's white versions, there's a silver version. These are a great monitor. You can have them right on the bench with you, right in your face. So let's flip it on. Sounds fine. It's getting the country station without even antenna. All that it's using is this little short piece of wire here. Great tuner on these old units. I don't want to play the music long because one of my last videos I got a copyright violation for 18 seconds of a song. But these monitors, you're able to hear things. Okay, it's obviously working. Put it to the phono stage. Well, here's 2 things I just heard. The control needs a spray and hum from the phono stage. We got to turn off the lamp because it influences it. Tip number 3. Circuit tracing without a signal tracer. On my workbench, which is a 1950s kitchen table, I have 3 benches actually in the house because I have different stuff at different stages. I'm got the phono stage on right now. You can signal trace by just passing your hand over but not touching components. This was a trick when I worked in a big shop that had 4 techs doing warranty work all day long, doing car stereo installs. We did warranty work for Yamaha, for Sensudi, for NAD, for Techniques. And we had this wall of test equipment. It was hilarious. And the people that were really good at it didn't use the test equipment all that often. And learned little tricks, you know. Oh, we have one dead phono channel, okay. They'd turn it on, turn it up a bit. And then let's say this side, you didn't get the hum. Oh, we know it's this side. So you know it's either one of these capacitors or a couple transistors on this side. You could isolate without using test equipment, simply passing over. And as you go through the stages, see on that stage you can actually hear stuff. Don't touch any of the transistor leads. Always touch things that are insulated. But you can actually just get a very quick idea what's dead and what's not. Then if you want to really get down to tracing components, then you get a signal tracer and inject a signal. And I actually have a whole cabinet here, you can't see it, of signal tracers, RF generators, what's the other thing? I actually have a vintage stereo tester, and so what it does is it has a preamp within it, so you can substitute the preamp inside this tester for the actual preamp. You can substitute stages. It has a resistor substitution box. Actually, my favorite piece of test equipment I got lately, I should give you a quick show on this, get some light back. This is a pocket oscilloscope from Amazon. And I actually have a full-size oscilloscope, dual trace. I love this one because tip number 3, you don't want your bench cluttered with stuff. You only want the stuff you need within reach. Wire cutters, needles, pliers, all that stuff, soldering irons over here. This baby, and it actually can do, besides showing you 2 traces, it can do RF up to 50 meg, I believe. It actually has a signal generator in it. So for instance, if you think there's something coming through on one channel, like a subsonic or an ultrasonic oscillation that's robbing power, you can find that with one of these. And I want to do another video, may recommend a couple of these pieces. This thing was 60 bucks. And it charges up. It holds a charge forever. It's auto sensing. So you can go into a circuit, you plug a probe into it, hit auto sensing, and it'll find if it's AC, DC, RF, power, whatever. Very handy thing to have. I'm going for the smaller, convenient stuff. The one piece of test equipment that's always on my bench is a good multimeter. This is actually an electrician's multimeter, but it does other things. I have some vintage multimeters, including some analog ones. But here's what I like about this one. It has a built-in capacitor tester, has a built-in transistor tester. It has, of course, resistance, AC, DC. It actually has a 20 kilohertz tone that it will generate. It has an audible continuity tester, ammeter, DC and AC ammeter, and it's quite interesting, very durable. I think it was $80 on sale from an electronics wholesaler. This was about a $140 meter. There's some really great new test equipment out there, but I'll tell you one thing about this. I've got an analog meter, and I'm just going to grab it and bring it over. When you're testing transistors and diodes, an analog meter I find is better. And this one actually has a built-in socket as well. And I think the best analog meter is a Simpson 260. But this is a $30 meter off of Amazon. I don't endorse buying it from anywhere. If I could buy it locally, I would. But so many of those places aren't operating anymore. The one thing about testing transistors, and we'll actually test some transistors further on, you actually get the needle moving and sweeping back. There's a very definite reading, whereas the transistor checker on the digital one, it can show a good transistor, especially germanium transistors, as bad. So just a couple things, but we will actually do a video on testing diodes and transistors, that kind of stuff later. Another tip, when you're running things, watch for things, especially if something's been turned off a long time, has been sitting in a closet or whatever, watch for heat. So I fixed that solder connection. They were still running a little bit warm. There's 2 bias pots, and if you worked on a Pioneer, a Sensu, any of those of this vintage, it's this kind of pot. And these turned, I put a screwdriver on with the unit off, and it's like, there's just not a good feel. I mean, these are better than most, these two, because they're pretty clean. This one here is actually, I would have to force it to turn. Okay, I've seen restorations where high-end oil caps are used for sound, and they leave in broken bias pots. But here's something from the computer industry. I don't know if you can see these. These here are 50K sealed replacements, and a lot of these end up inside like computer power supplies, things like that. There's still a need for them, and they have 3 leads just like the other ones, and they fit right in the hole. But you've actually got a sealed pot that won't get dirty. It's a precision, I'm going to put it, you can get the bias exactly right on, and it's stable. These ones here tend to change value with heat because the carbon track is exposed. I also, when I'm doing restorations, I have lots of old cottage cheese and yogurt containers to put screws and parts in. I have one with all the screws from the lid and everything, and then I have one with the old parts. And then when I'm done restoring it, I put a lid on it and say it's the Kenwood so-and-so. Because down the road you might want to know exactly what was done to it. But let's come back to this one. So I've actually got the unit.
Right now it's 0.99% APR.
It's picking up a few stations even without an antenna. And this is one of these things, the needle's working, the lights are on. So this one's actually working fairly well right now with a lot of original parts. I'm going to do a few extra things to it. It sounds good. You can make it sound better. That's part 2 of this. You can replace a few major components like the main filter cap. And this one has a bit of it's just a slight bit warm, which makes me suspicious of it. The 2 output caps, we'll go and do, this one doesn't have a lot of caps. We'll replace some of them. And then what you'll notice, if you do for instance, all the ones on one board, maybe the preamp board, maybe the power amp board, you'll notice incremental improvements as you go along. You replace 1 channel worth, you listen to it. I've actually done this a few times. I will do 1 channel on a board and then do a listening test with a half decent pair of headphones. I like the ones that have big cushions so you filter out the noise. And you'll go, wow, with new caps, it sounds so sparkling now. Or listen to the bass come alive. You'll notice little things like that. And then there's actually no way of testing the fidelity of the phono preamp actually without having a turntable. I actually have one behind me. That's something I can do a little bit later. Anyway, at this point, the unit's working fairly well, so we're going to do a recap. So I'm going to set up to do some recapping. I'll just show you some stuff on that. Thanks for watching and listening.